I don't need to have any evidence that he's part of MS-13 or Tren de Aragua for him not to be in this country. He's already in the country illegally.
You don't feel for him in a situation?
Not at all.
Why?
Again, well, let's look at the reason, right? In 2012, he came into the country illegally based on asylum case, right?
Right.
Didn't apply for asylum.
He doesn't speak English.
I don't care. Well, there's Spanish immigration lawyers.
Do you know what they tell people?
Yep, that's me, and that's Madeline Summerville, a left-leaning liberal who's largely disenfranchised by her own party's politics. And I'm David Cade, the complete opposite, a right-leaning conservative who fully supports President Trump. So how did I end up here? Well, I had this crazy idea that two people who completely disagree can sit down together and react to some absurd clips on both sides of the aisle. After debating college students, protesters, and randoms on my live stream for the last 6 months, I always felt our conversations weren't enough. Just not enough time to actually sway their mind. After President Trump's honeymoon, I knew I had to go on the offensive. The misinformation, the narratives, and the daily attacks, all targeting the Madelines of the world. So how do we win them over? Watch the first episode of The Clash.
Madeline?
Yes, hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I love this place. It's so cool.
Absolutely. So for the people that are just tuning in for the first time, because this is episode 1 of hopefully of something that's going to be 8 episodes or something like that.
Awesome.
I'm a conservative and you are?
A left-leaning liberal.
And we obviously disagree on a lot of stuff, right?
We do.
So this isn't going to be an echo chamber episode or something like that. We're going to probably disagree on some stuff, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So, my name is David, first of all, and I thought the fun thing that we could do is just briefly introduce ourselves to the new audience that are going to be joining in. So first of all, let's talk about, who you voted for.
Sure.
Why did you vote for them?
Sure.
And then lastly, how do you identify? So I'll let you go first.
Sure. Should I look right at the camera?
Whatever you want to do.
Okay, sure. Hey, everyone. My name's Madeline. Do you want me to say where I'm from or anything, or just?
Whatever.
Okay. Yeah. I live in Atlanta. I voted for Kamala Harris because I would vote for my 2-year-old fat beagle before I would vote for Donald Trump. And it's not because his policies to his first term were that bad. Like, I thought his policies for housing were pretty good. I thought, I don't think he's anti-Semitic. Like, I almost said like the TikTok word for it because I'm so used to TikTok debates. I don't have a lot of the same perceptions that other people have of him. I have a very specific reason why I don't vote for him. But it's not that I loved Kamala so much, and I don't really even identify like the word progressive to me is weird, because I'm just a more traditional person. But I tend to lean as far left as possible without falling off the train there.
It'll be an interesting episode to see how far left it is. Cool. And so I'm David. I'm center right, I would say. I used to be pretty far right when I first got into politics. So it's been an adventure to make my way into the center here. I voted for President Trump in 2016 when I didn't really know too much about politics. When I started to get into a little bit more politics, I voted for him in 2020, and then obviously voted for my president now in 2024. There's plenty of reasons why I voted for President Trump, but I think one of the most unique things about Trump himself is that he's not your traditional conservative, and I can't really call myself as a traditional conservative either. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, pop culture and whatnot. I'm pretty socially liberal. And I see President Trump as exactly that, a perfect reflection of individuals that find themselves in the center, all that stuff, right? I mean, the policy reasons can be like immigration, for example, and all this various stuff, foreign policy. I thought the economy, but I guess we'll see what happens with that and the tariffs. But,
sure.
But yeah, that's who we are. And I think one of the main reasons we decided to do this in the first place is because we actually met on a TikTok live.
We did.
We did. We both really do enjoy talking to people that oppose what our values or our position is on stuff like that. So I thought it would be interesting to do a round 2 because we've debated once. We've actually debated twice. You came to my Turning Point event.
Yes, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And so now we're going to do this thing where we're just going to sit down officially with a mic like this.
I'm so excited.
Main thing that we're going to do is that we're not going to just read a bunch of boring articles and all that stuff. This isn't a news show, guys. This is all about watching videos that I chose and she chose, and we don't know what those videos are. We haven't seen those videos except obviously the ones we chose.
Right.
that are cringy of the other side, right? So I'm going to be showing stuff that I think is cringe from the left, and you're going to do the same thing for the right.
Yes.
And we're going to react to it, and it should be pretty interesting. At the end, though, just to show you guys that we are a little bit different, we're very civil. I'm sure it's going to get heated and controversial and stuff like that, but we know how to be civil and tolerant of each other's positions, which is why at the very end, we're going to show a video that we found cringy of our own side.
And I like that very much.
Because
there's plenty.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what I was going to say. You know, we have to showcase the crazy stuff that is happening on our side.
Yes.
Because I don't think there's anything better for, in general, the people in the center than highlighting how we're the far extreme side of
Totally agree. And I think I should probably tell the audience too. So I used to work for the Democratic Party in Georgia. I was a speechwriter for them. They did not hire me back. They did not like what I had to say. There are a couple of politicians who still worked with me afterwards, but those were few and far between. They did not want me to come back in because I wanted to give credit where credit was due, and I wanted to expose the problems within the party so that we could gain some credibility back, and they didn't want to do those things. So I don't have a place within my own party, and I think that's why.
Maybe at the end of this, episode, you'll be Maga. Not this episode, but maybe at the end of the show, you'll be Maga or something. That's the goal here at the end of the day.
Luck, my friend.
I know
Good luck.
it's a long stretch, but hey, everything is possible at the end of the day. What I do like, guys, is the reason why I did sit down with Madeline is because it would be really, really interesting to sit down with somebody that is completely deranged on the extreme left, but I have a common sense individual here.
Thank you.
That rejects a lot of the crazy positions that Democrats take that is like very unpopular.
And
like
illogical.
And there you go, right? So that's why I thought this would be interesting, because I think I'm also not on the far right of my side of that aisle.
I would agree with that. And I think you're still compassionate too in your approach.
Good. I like that.
Yeah.
I used to think with my heart, but now I think with both. So that's maybe why I have a little bit of compassion. All right, so let's get to it first of all. So I don't even want to preface anything like what this video is about. We're just gonna get straight into it. All right, so this is mine. This is my first one.
Okay.
All right.
Welcome back to our live CNN Town Hall. We're back with Senator Bernie Sanders. I want to introduce Grace Thomas. She's a local civil rights attorney. She's a Democrat. Grace?
They, them pronouns, actually. Thank you.
Oh.
Good evening, Senator Sanders. Polling and turnout data indicate that men of all racial demographics are turning away from the Democratic Party. But of course, white men in particular do not feel that the DNC's messaging targets them and the issues that they care about.
This wasn't the cringy one.
Let me explain why I think this is just ridiculous, right? So you have Anderson Cooper, who's, I would say, pretty far on the left.
Right.
You can find him center left, whatever. He's definitely on the left.
Yes.
He's a white male.
Sure.
He's gay, right?
Yes.
Okay.
He's also a Vanderbilt.
All that stuff, right?
Yes.
He obviously sees someone that looks like a woman, and he addresses her by she.
Right.
She corrects him by saying, my pronouns are actually they and them. That's not the point at all. I could care less about that. That's something that's, overplayed and stuff like that. It's the question that she asks. She says, we're losing a ton of men, minority men and white men especially, like Anderson Cooper. And she's asking, what can we do to get them back? Do you think me, imagine myself, right? I'm common sense.
Of course.
If I'm corrected like this, right? Yes. Am I being swayed to the left by any means whatsoever, regardless of what they do? Because the question was, how do we get back the people, the men that we're losing by correcting them about the pronouns? All right, what do you think?
No, so I love, and the reason why I thought it was cringy wasn't because of the correction. It was because of exactly what you said. It was because of the follow-up question. And so I actually really love talking about this. And one of the reasons why I keep getting hired back to go on to different TV shows as a political commentator is because I'm not afraid to talk about DEI and I'm not afraid to talk about trans issues. So I was in the sister chorus to the Atlanta Gay Men's Chorus. So it's like a third lesbian, right? And it's very welcoming to trans people. And I just want to be clear, trans people, I don't know where anybody got the idea that trans people were going to get beat you up if you didn't gender them correctly. And most of them just want to go hide. They're just dealing with being socially awkward because there's not really a place for them. They don't want the attention. And then if you mess up the pronoun and then you call more attention to it, it's just like.
Do you think it's more that the politicians are kind of using this? Because you're saying like the trans people they don't want to be, but what about her?
And so I think
or
the
they,
woke
them,
thing,
sorry.
Right. And so I think the woke thing is interesting because at that point, and you're right, because with her it's different, but people say like, oh, you can't make a joke. Like you can't make a joke about this. And I was like, do you think I didn't make fun of all those girls in my choir? Like, of course I did. I made fun of every lesbian person, trans person, because they're my friends and I love them.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to make fun of them. And so it's funny to me because being like with people who are in this group and seeing their reactions to things and how, like, if I couldn't make fun of them, we couldn't be friends because I tease everybody all day long. But I'm not afraid that when like a joke comes out of my mouth, that it's going to be offensive, because when you love somebody, it's not going to come out that way. Obviously you can make mistakes, and then you could say, I'm sorry, but I've never seen a trans person ever actually get offended or upset that they were misgendered. And if you were, because if you were genuinely trying to treat them with respect, which is what Anderson Cooper was doing here, he was genuinely trying to treat her with respect.
Well, hold up. He said, oh.
Right? It's because of her tone.
I don't know if he's, okay.
Right?
It's because of the tone. Okay.
Because of her tone back to him. Because he wasn't trying to treat her treat them disrespectfully, right? And I think that's the thing. So when somebody speaks to you in a respectful way and they get it wrong, you can gently correct them. Like there's a way to respond in kind with the same level of respect. I've never seen anybody get that sassy about it.
No.
And it could be because they were on TV and they wanted to make a point, but that's the thing.
But is that helping, do you think, this position that this individual took?
No.
That's not helping Democrats whatsoever,
no, not
right?
at all, because if you want to bring somebody over to your side, you're not going to do that by mic dropping on them, right? You're going to do it by reaching an understanding. Like the goal isn't to win, it's to reach a deeper understanding. And so what she was trying to do was win. And it's so ironic that she started talking about so absolutely not. Like I think that was not the right approach based on her tone, because I don't think he was being disrespectful. And
he's definitely not being disrespectful, because I put myself in his position, right? It didn't say on the no card that individual that is transgender, that identifies as they, that, right? It's so much detail has to go into the no card for him to properly address, because what is he seeing with his two eyes? Something that looks like a woman.
Sure.
And I would make that mistake.
I'm sure I would too.
99.9999% of people would make that mistake. Yes. And the reason I'm saying this is because I don't want to throw like a lifeline out to the Democrats, but when I see my fellow colleagues across the aisle at a 26% favorability rating asking why are we losing men, and then correcting them like that, it's just very ironic to me. And I'm glad that you see that as well, because at the end of the day, I hope that the common sense Democrats that still exist, because obviously I'm looking at one, see that this is absurd.
And what's funny to me is that I think I'm extreme in my views. Like I really do. I think I'm like, maybe it's because of how I was raised, but I feel like I'm way on the opposite side of Trump. But like, for example, I totally agree with what you're saying here. I don't think that advanced the cause. I think you can't hang your hat on instances like that. But at the same time, I don't think that the government has any business saying that there are only two genders and signing an executive order about it.
Well, that's interesting, right? I think we've debated this previously, but if that applies to the federal workforce, or that applies to certain things like Title IX, for example, in order to uphold Title IX, then I think that is necessary, especially because you have all these crazy, in my opinion, arguments about, sex and gender and not being mutually exclusive and all this various stuff that colleges can use to actually discriminate against biological women. So, but let's get into your video. Yeah. What are we playing now? Which one do you want to go with first? So you got a couple options. You can go John Oliver.
Let's go John Oliver. So at that point, like, how can you defend that, right? Because you're obviously not being very careful. And I have not seen Howard Lutnick or anybody else from the administration coming out and defending that formula, because it's nonsense. So then at that point, you have to go, the administration is either lying to me or it doesn't care what I think. They're either very bad at math or this is just messaging, right? It's one or the other. And either way, it makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, it doesn't make just you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Obviously, look at the stock market. They're pretty uncertain, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, and I'll probably get grilled from this from the far, the extreme people. I don't want to call them far right because I don't want to group them with those people similar. You don't have to agree with every single thing that Trump does.
Right.
And well before the election, leading up to it, 3 months leading up to the election, I consistently said on the TikTok lives that the day that President Trump brings in blanket tariffs, I will criticize him because that is just a terrible policy. Maybe it's a good policy in the long term, but when you just finish campaigning on lowering prices, maybe we should hold off on the tariff thing, or maybe just isolate China specifically. There's many different ways that I can approach this, but what he's done is just so stupid. It's irresponsible. I get the idea, you and I've gave you some talking points for your show, right? About the long term, right? Like, guys, don't grill me or like start unsubscribing or something like that. I think tariffs is a good idea,
right?
Just the way it was implemented, and then also the time that it was implemented can be adjusted, right? I like the idea of isolating China, but how are you going to isolate China when you just slap tariffs on everybody?
Yeah, the example that you gave me I thought was really good, which was in 2017, Trump put tariffs on solar panels that came from China. As a result, businesses who would have bought that in the U.S. instead bought American, and it increased the solar panel industry. Like, that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
It's just when you put it on every element of the house that you're building and not just the solar panels, now we've got a problem, so.
And we're seeing that fallout right now because right now it was over the weekend, it was, we're going to, electronics and all this stuff that's coming from China.
Yeah.
That's exempt, right?
Yeah.
And now we're looking at potentially exempting cars, right? To me, maybe, right, the conspiracy theory, let's put the tinfoil hat on, is that President Trump is playing such 4D chess that the only way that he would have been able to actually isolate China like this and get all these countries to come and negotiate a bilateral deal is by actually doing this. Because my friend and I, we went back and forth about this, would countries actually take him seriously if he was just threatening to impose this stuff. He actually went the step to do it.
Right.
And now, based on White House officials, right? Well, I haven't seen anything else besides White House officials saying this, that a lot of these countries are coming to negotiate a bilateral deal.
Yes.
And I think that's smart. What is good for us with India isn't good with us, with like, Russia, for example, right? So maybe bilateral deals is the best deal in terms of trade, especially if we want to isolate China and not depend on China and all that various stuff.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, so I totally agree with you. Here's the thing, like, I don't even care that much that the messaging is inconsistent, as much as like we can't get a solid answer. Right? Like, if it ended up and we could get a solid answer by the end, be like, hey, we just had to pretend for a while, so that we could make the threat look credible, fine. But you keep lying to us. Like, you keep coming out and you saying that it's not, this isn't negotiable. This isn't for negotiation. And then he comes out and says it's for negotiation, right?
And I'll just to interrupt you real quickly, I can't defend that, because when I debate people on college campuses, on TikTok Live, whatever it is with you, right? I can't tell you what is the message, right? Because President Trump will say one thing, but Secretary Lutnick will say completely else, which is why it's important that the Treasury, Secretary Besnett, something like that, has to take the lead. And he did take the lead, and finally things started to clear up. And by no means we're out of like the shitty days. But that's, sorry, go ahead.
And then like Lutnick comes out and tries to justify like tariffing Penguin Island, and he gives an explanation that is total nonsense, which is like, oh, they could trade through another island. It's like, there's no infrastructure to trade in that island. It's 80% penguin. So like, don't treat us like we're stupid. And I get, again, that like you don't want to release war plans or whatever but then don't tell us anything at all. Like, don't make us part of your game. That makes that, and because my issue with Trump was always that I didn't trust him, this just feeds into that narrative.
That makes sense. And for me, I understand how you can lose trust in that, but then I start to look at I hate the policy implementation side of it, but the idea of it is pretty damn good, especially if we end up in a situation where we have free trade with various countries, but America still has advantage of it. We're not losing manufacturers from it. And by the way, just this idea of bringing back manufacturers to America, I'm on board, but nobody's going to be creating shirts in these factories and stuff like that, right? So there's some manufacturing that you probably can't bring back.
And I've got strong feelings about that part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Strong feelings.
Strong feelings.
Yes.
Let's watch the next video.
Okay, cool.
And
Let's do it.
All right. So my next video that I wanted to choose also kind of goes along the lines of the DEI stuff. And and the reason I chose both of my clips today to be ones that are kind of along the lines of like, the cultural issues, if you would say so, is because I think this is where Democrats are completely losing it. Like the common sense Democrats are completely breaking away from this crazy DEI or critical race theory, whatever that they're trying to sprinkle into like the rhetoric. So, all right, let's watch this one.
So explain to our audience why even a trip like this one, all the trips that we take in this space benefit mankind.
So it benefits humankind, and I'm going to keep correcting the mankind and the man-made and the man missions, because this is exactly what this mission is about, is expanding the perspective of who does space.
Now we can't say mankind because it's diminishing who's actually partaking in space. We have to start to say humankind, because when we say mankind, it discriminates against women.
So here's the thing, right? And remember how I was reasonable before. I'm going to take a different position on this one.
Okay.
But like starting out, let me say, so I did my thesis in undergrad on naming, and naming objects and the development of like categories for human language. And I used mankind for everything, or man, because growing up studying Torah, like that's how it was translated, right? Adam, and so one of the questions that I got on my thesis panel that actually left the professors arguing before after I left was, don't you think a woman's perspective on this is different? And I said no, because I think that when it comes to the initial development of language before it's been created, I think it's still just a human's perception on it. I'm talking about the very first development of it. So I don't think that there was anything culturally that had like skewed anyone's perceptions yet. So I don't think that. And that was very unpopular. That was a very unpopular opinion. Now, the difference
So wait. This opinion, obviously, you get roasted by like the people on the left, right? Because they are so hard on the idea that you have to use this inclusive language, right? That you have to include anybody into it. And apparently saying mankind actually discriminates against women.
So here, though, it's different, because to say that we shouldn't use inclusive language and it's like thought or language policing is to forget that we created the word mankind to begin with, right? Because if they had asked me, do you think that a woman's perspective on language is different now on it in general than a man's, I would say, yeah, absolutely, because there's a lot that already has been culturally determined over time. And so I think that the thing that scares me about policing language and thought is making it more narrow, not making it more inclusive. And because when you make it more narrow, you tend to make it less correct. Mm-hmm. And there are certainly instances where you can widen it and make it less correct. But I think in this case, it really, representation does matter. Like, astronaut Barbie matters. Maybe we don't put Katy Perry in space, though. Like, Wendy's trolled her. Did you see that? It was so funny.
And I'm on Wendy's side of this, right?
I'm on Wendy's side.
Okay,
they were send her back. I was dying.
I'm glad that we can at least agree on
this.
That was
so funny. What are you doing in space?
And you weren't even really in space. It was okay, I get it. You were in space for a minute,
right? But
right?
If
you
she
crossed the
genuinely
line.
cared about space and was like, lots of girls should want to grow up to be astronauts because it hasn't really been a thing, and we should say humankind because we want lots of women to walk on the moon. Cool, but don't put Katy Perry.
But if we say mankind, is that going to suddenly not be as motivational for younger girls?
I think so.
Wait, no. Okay.
Yeah.
So explain that to me. How, right? I'm imagining, let's say in the future I have a young daughter.
Yes.
And she wants to become an astronaut.
Yes.
I don't think she's going to suddenly lose motivation to become an astronaut because of mankind,
so
right?
I think it's less about her losing motivation and more about encouraging other girls to consider it, mm-hmm. right? Because if your perception, a lot of people's perception is based on language. And so if in your mind what you picture is a male astronaut and then it's reinforced by the language that you use, then that perception in your mind doesn't change, right? And
I totally understand what you're saying, But let's apply that to the average voter. When they see this kind of stuff, they don't go through this kind of thought process that you went through
so I think it's subconscious, though. I think they do go through it. I think they just don't realize that they're going through it, and that's the deal. And I study language, so I'm a jury consultant, and I study all these language and linguistic persuasion tactics. And so I understand like the subconscious influence of language, and word choice matters because like. And I know President Trump is a manifester too, right? He understands that language shapes reality. And I think that when you expand a definition of something in order to be more inclusive, I don't think that can be bad.
But how is that different than what we just saw in the first clip, right? The correcting an older white man about your pronouns, and then the same exact thing. This is an older black lady correcting an older white man that they've grown up using these words, that mankind, right? How is that going to help Democrats win elections? Or how is that, I guess, do we actually need that today?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So I think we do need it. Do I think that this kind of correction helps the party? No, because I think here's the difference, right? And you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about it before with Anderson's response when he was like, oh, because obviously Anderson wanted to get it right? He's sitting there with Bernie Sanders in a blue town hall. And she knows that she's talking to another person who's on her side.
Yeah.
Right. In this case, we don't know that. I don't know, all I know is that it was CBS.
Guys, I can almost say that probably they're on the safe side.
Sure. But I can say with some certainty that they said mankind without thinking, right? But
that's the problem that I have, right? Is that I will most likely do that myself,
right?
And if somebody corrected me, I would laugh in their face. I again, and just to be respectful of your argument, I completely understand and tolerant of your position.
Yes.
But it's ridiculous to me that a grown person would say that to another grown person.
So let's go back and play the sentence again, because I actually talk about this all the time on my TikTok lives, where I tell people you're not going to win if you shame the other person. That's not how you're going to bring them to the other side. So I will offer an alternative of what she could have said that was a little better.
I like it.
So explain to our audience why even a trip like this one, all the trips that we take in this space benefit mankind.
So it benefits humankind.
And I think there were two black men, right? And it was a black female.
No, it's all female crew.
No, that we're having this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And so first of all, this is a woman's mission, right? So that's on people's minds. The word mankind, I'm sure that he didn't mean as disrespectful. So what I would say in response to that, right, would be something like, it would be something like, actually it benefits humankind, right? Because that's all of us, right? And then they can go, oh yeah, that's right, rather than, oh damn it,
But is mankind just specifically men?
So again, like when I wrote my thesis, I didn't say that. Like you can look up stuff that I published that absolutely disagrees with that, because that was how I was raised and that's how my brain worked. And I went to a liberal university and they were like, how could you do this? And I was like, because there's no difference then. But here I think there is, and I think the goal of the mission itself was to be more expansive and inclusive of other people. But DEI in space. That's how we we'll do it. DEI in space.
There we go. Because we need DEI everywhere, and not just in space, right?
In space. But oh my God, I can't stand how this.
I think we can go back and forth about it for a very long time.
We definitely could.
Let's go to your clip now, the Christy Gnome, or do you want something else? This is the only other one that you have that you could have that criticizes my side. You have Dave Rubin as well, and how is everything they do is so embarrassing. So up to you.
Let's do Christy Gnome.
Christy Gnome.
It's too good. I can't pass it up.
I'm here at CCOT today and visiting this facility. And first of all, I want to thank El Salvador and their president for their partnership with the United States of America to bring our terrorists here and to incarcerate them and have consequences for the violence that they have perpetuated in our communities. I also want everybody to know, if you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. you will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
Okay. So let's talk about the visual imagery of this really fast, okay?
I had a feeling it was not about what she said. It's about
the optics, because
optics.
that was the point of the video, right? Was the optics. So first of all, you've got shirtless dudes in the back standing there behind bars with tattoos all over them, right? I don't know how many people standing behind them, but either way, this is very dehumanizing. Like, they're not human beings, right? And I'm not a Democrat who is soft on crime. For me, because I've spent a lot of time working on children's issues, I'm like, you hurt a kid, get out. I don't care what happens to you. But the point of the due process problem that we've been talking about is that not everyone who's there has done those things. And the fact is that for the last 12 years, Trump has been convincing the American public that immigrants in general are rapists, murderers, and coming from mental institutions. He's been repeating that for 12 years. And I think, and that's the reason I didn't vote for him from the beginning, was because he called a group of human beings vermin. And that's why I didn't trust him, because I was like, you know what you're doing. If you study language, I'm like, you know what you're doing. When you're dehumanizing a whole group of people, which is why it's so easy now for people to say, you know what, I don't care what the Fifth Amendment says, even though I care about the Constitution, because they've been linguistically manipulated into believing that. For 12 years, they've been conditioned into believing that, to letting that go. And so I never thought I'd agree with Megyn Kelly about anything, right? But Megyn Kelly had an excellent comment about Kristi Noem here. She was like, she said, you know, she's dressed up like me, like her hair looks like me, and you know, sitting doing her podcast.
She has a $60,000 watch on too.
Did she?
Yeah, it's a Rolex on her.
And she was like, "Don't glamorize this." And it's the same thing with Katy Perry, right? In the space shuttle, don't glamorize it, right? Like, I used to say to people all the time, I should be able to say that Kamala's hair looks excellent, right? Without somebody saying like, you should say that she's smart. I'm like, I know she's smart. I think she's brilliant, but I like her suits also. Like, and so I've got no problem with a woman being feminine whatsoever. I'm a very feminine woman, but the issue here, I think, is you don't need to glamorize this, because the stark contrast is, it's so crazy and so dehumanizing.
Yeah, I agree with you on the first part, not so much on the dehumanizing thing, and I'll explain to you that in a second. But let's look at the visual thing. I agree with you. I think that it's absolutely ridiculous to have the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security going out looking like Megyn Kelly is during her podcast, but, you know, visiting one of the top security prisons in the world, whatever, right? All I was going to say is that all she's missing is a nice little Louis Vuitton bag, and then it would be fantastic, right?
She's prison guard Barbie.
Well, I think it's a little bit interesting.
And like, it's nothing wrong with Barbie if she wants to be. Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
I cut off here. Some movement. Okay. Give me a test real quick.
Test 1 2 3.
Perfect.
Test.
Okay.
Awesome.
So yeah, all she was missing was a Louis Vuitton bag, and that would have completed the entire thing. The dehumanizing part. No, you're fine. The dehumanizing part, though, I think is the most interesting thing to me.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, if somebody, it's proven that they're part of a gang, and that gang has been designated by the United States as a foreign terrorist organization, is there anything like is this a human? If it's an individual that raped a little girl, murder, right?
No.
So that visual, you wouldn't, like, if all those people behind her were those people, that's no problem, right? Or do you still have a problem with that visual? Because I'm kind of curious where that line is.
That's a good question. And I think that my problem with the visual is that it fits with the narrative that Trump has been creating. So I don't know if there's another version of that visual that would like, where it was more accurate, you know, like if you proved to me that every single person in there was like, had hurt children, then yes, that's a different story.
What if they are, it's definitely proven that they are part of a gang, which we can hypothetically imagine what they've done in order to be part of that gang. So first of all, the majority of those people that are behind her are probably not the individuals that came to the United States illegally and were deported. Those are probably people that El Salvador, cleaned up off the streets, right? There's over 100,000 of them in there he cleaned up the streets. Now the country's safer. There's, question whether how much due process these individuals got, but it's without a doubt that El Salvador is much more safer now. So I think that the people that are standing behind her are actually MS-13 individuals or Chandragua or whatever local El Salvador gang that there is. And I think that justifies it. I wouldn't want her to wear like the stuff that she's wearing and look like she's doing, but I don't think it's dehumanizing when we're talking about a specific individual. Do you agree on that? Or?
I think you're okay with it because we've already dehumanized them, because we've already said, if you hurt a kid, you're not even a human to me.
No.
And I feel that way, so that's cool. No. But the problem is that it does fit with the narrative, and
grouping all the immigrants into this. Yes. And I disagree with you. My biggest bone to pick with people on the left when it comes down to immigration is that I constantly see this. I almost feel like it's purposely manipulating. Okay. And you know this with the word game.
Yeah.
I myself, I wouldn't vote for somebody like Trump if he was discriminating immigrants. He is specific. It's illegal aliens. It's illegal immigrants, right? And I understand how it can be the same exact thing. But when we're talking about which people are bad, it's not just a person that's illegally here helping his parents or whatever it is for 20 years, specifically talking about the individual that is here illegally that is violent.
But we're not.
But I think we are.
So let me give you an example.
And that's I'll give it to you. But it's reflective in who they're prioritizing to deport out of here. Go ahead.
So I think that's what they're telling us, that they're prioritizing, and then when the New York Times or another organization sends a FOIA in and gets a bunch of information back that's not the case, then everyone doubts it. And you can't get the truth. And so I was on Live Now from Fox over this past weekend talking about the Supreme Court decisions. And there were almost 300 comments that said they came here illegally. They don't deserve a trial. They don't deserve anything. They came here illegally. So first of all, there's a distinction between being a violent criminal and coming here illegally. The guy that everyone's been talking about, Abrego Garcia, his story was that when he was a teenager, his mom owned a food service business. She had like a store, and she did grocery deliveries. And just like the mafia did in a lot of like Northeastern American communities, where they would come into stores and say like, hey, we want to cut your profits, or we're going to like recruit your kid. They did the same thing to her. And they said, we want to cut your profits, or we're going to recruit your kids. And they left and they crossed the border. And
illegally, right? In 2012?
Yeah. But the thing that I don't understand.
So let me just go ahead.
Yeah. The thing that I don't understand is why do you think that life is worth less than a life of somebody who lives here, right? Like that's an honest human being who's trying to get away. So he and his brother left. They came to America, and he has no criminal record. Like the Supreme Court wrote in their decision that he has no criminal record, and they could check that, right? They could get that information.
But okay, so the first thing I'll say is that if it's a legitimate case of asylum, which everything that you should explain based on his story seems like a legitimate case for asylum, then why not actually claim asylum the legal way? Why cross into the country illegally, evade anything related to immigration for 7 years, just to in 2019, when you already don't have the opportunity to seek asylum because you can only do so a year after illegal entry, you try to seek asylum, and an immigration judge says, no, we're not granting you asylum because of this evidence that we have here that you're part of MS-13.
That's not what happened.
It was, and then the higher court, the appellate court or whatever, confirmed that it's sufficient enough evidence that he's part of MS-13.
No, that's not what happened.
There was a judge that came in and put a temporary withholding order, but there was a deportation order in 2019.
That's not what happened.
Okay.
A withholding order, it's correct that if there's you can only have a withholding order if you have a deportation order.
Yeah.
But the withholding order forbade him from being removed.
Yeah.
That was the point. The judge reviewed the evidence, and they said that the only evidence that they had that he was in a gang was that he had on a Chicago Bulls hat and sweatshirt, and that and that somebody else with the same name as him was in a gang in New York.
But that's the withholding order, right? That judge gave the withholding order. This was after the two judges, the regular circuit and then the appellate court, agreed that this individual can be deported.
I never saw that.
Okay, so in 2019, he went in front of immigration, or not even an immigration judge, a judge, to seek asylum and adjudicate his.
The only relevant decision is that one. There's no other relevant decision.
But here's the interesting thing. So the judge that he went in front of in 2019, where he wanted to adjudicate his asylum case, right? That judge said, yes, you are part. There's enough evidence based on the informant stuff like this that you're part of MS-13.
No, he did not say that.
Well, this is just what I read, right? And then explain to me then this.
Yeah.
The appellate court agreed, and upheld the lower court's order for a deportation order. Then an immigration judge came in and essentially said, hey, listen, we're going to put the withhold order, right? That withhold order came for a reason. It came because of the 2019 judges agreeing that there is enough evidence.
No.
Okay, well, here's what I've also seen. The immigration lawyers actually aren't, I don't know how to say this, but the DOJ authority supersedes the immigration lawyers. So an immigration lawyer can put a withholding order, but the DOJ can withdraw that order and essentially supersede whatever they want to. So
those are lies that Stephen Miller's been telling. So one of the videos I was going to send, and I don't blame a single person for thinking what you're thinking, because that's what the White House is saying. Mm-hmm. It's not anyone's fault that thinks that, because they're straight up getting bullshit. Okay. And
where did the deportation order come from then?
So the deportation order came from the it was before he was actually never adjudicated to have been in a gang. That never happened.
Well, no, there's in 2019.
So the feds applied for a deportation order, right? So that exists until it gets withheld. Mm-hmm. So then the judge looked at it, saw the evidence, said that evidence about the same name and the sweatshirt and the hat was not sufficient evidence to say that he was in a gang. So he's actually never been ruled to be in a gang.
We might have to fact check this
That's
after
fine.
the.
That's fine. And if you go and you look at and this is reason number 4 million that I don't trust the Trump administration, is because Stephen Miller, and actually we could watch one of the videos if you wanted to, because it's really short, but he's coming out and he's saying we won the Supreme Court decisions.
9-0.
No, you didn't.
Well, okay.
You did not.
First of all, right? What does it mean to facilitate?
Okay, so I've heard that argument, and that's irrelevant.
But no, I mean the court even the Supreme Court said we have no idea what the lower court means by it was facilitate, right. And what was the other one?
Effectuate and facilitate.
Yeah.
They said we're remanding it, and you guys need to clarify that. But they didn't say. They said the rest of the order still exists. Mm-hmm. They said.
What if El Salvador's president thinks he's a terrorist, he keeps him in a prison? How do we get him back?
So the line that everyone's been hearing about how if somebody goes back to their other country that we don't have any jurisdiction to bring them back is completely false. There's a process and procedure that's used all the time. People make mistakes before this one where people get deported to the wrong place.
But that's if there's an extradition or something like that between the two countries.
Just if ICE F's up.
Well, what kind of jurisdiction does a lower court have, like a district court have over El Salvador? Or over President Trump's Article 2? That's the difference, right?
Yeah. So it's that the district court absolutely still has authority over the president. Mm-hmm. They absolutely do. See, the DOJ started making this like checklist of all the criteria that they thought qualified somebody to be in a gang. Mm-hmm. Like they have tattoos, they have pictures with gang members, things like that.
This is before Trump's DOJ though.
No, this is in Trump's DOJ.
No, Obama created those guidelines. The tattoos related to MS. This is how he deported so many people.
So what they're doing though is using that in place of going to court.
And
those are two separate.
Which is why I think. Right, I agree with you on that. However, unless there's an emergency which allows the President Trump to completely remove those processes.
So let me explain the emergency part.
Yeah, but like that's a 9-0 ruling. Is that the president of the United States has the authority under but to enact the Aliens Enemies Act and to remove individuals out of the country with limited or even no due process.
That's wrong. That's just wrong.
Well, and I'll say this just so we have something to say.
Anything.
I know. The majority of Americans agree with that.
The majority of Americans agree with it because that's the line they've been told by the White House. Okay, so there were two different decisions. One decision was Alien Enemies Act decision, and the other one was the order to turn the plane around. Okay, so I'll explain the first one first. The court ruled that President Trump can declare that the Alien Enemies Act applies, right? But that's the same thing as like Michael Scott in The Office going like, I declare bankruptcy. Like you can do it, like you can make that assumption.
That's how you enact the federal statute in the first place.
But what they said was, regardless of whether he thinks that it applies or not here, every single person still gets due process. The purpose of the enactment of the Alien Enemies Act, the purpose of its creation was for times of one, when Congress has declared war, or two, when there's been an invasion on behalf of a foreign government.
And there is?
Not on behalf of a foreign government.
Well, hold up. There's well enough document. This was even on Real Clear Politics that Tren de Aragua is a paramilitary group that is trained by Maduro's regime in Venezuela.
Fine.
And was purposely sent to the United States.
Let's assume that,
sure.
Fine, because they've already given him the authority to declare the Alien Enemies Act. That's fine.
Yeah.
You can still assume that, and this still works, and I think that's exactly probably why the Supreme Court said it this way. But the point is, as you rightly said, that in instances where there's a foreign invasion or an invasion by a foreign government, or they've declared war, that a foreign national being in our country creates an imminent threat of danger, right? And imminent doesn't mean like something bad could happen. It means like danger's lurking around every corner.
Yeah.
So the point of the enactment of this act is that you don't have to grant them due process.
Yeah, absolutely.
The entire point is that it's so dangerous that we don't have time to deal with people's rights right now.
And there's examples for that.
And the court said the exact opposite. The court said you can go ahead and call it whatever you want, but every single person gets due process. It's the exact opposite of the purpose of the act.
In the ruling, didn't the court agree that the administration provided due process?
No, absolutely not.
They said that there was limited. They did not say that there was limited or expedited version of anything. They just pretty much said, okay, so what kind of due process do I need to give a person that is part of the Tren de Aragua? So
the point is that the due process is to figure out whether they're part of the Tren de Aragua. You don't get to assume that at first.
And who determines that?
The judge.
Okay, and how does the judge determine that?
With evidence.
What kind? Like
both sides get to make their case. The state gets to make their case, or the feds get to make their case, and then you get to make your case. That's the entire point, is that you don't get to say that they're in a gang because of a checklist. You get to make your case in front of a judge. Like there are other countries that think that healthcare is a human right, or that housing is a human right. We picked due process and free speech. That's what we picked. So whether people like that or not, that's what the law is.
When they show the evidence, right? You said that all they showed for this one individual was the Chicago Red Bull cap and him throwing up some sign or something like that.
No, it wasn't. It was that he had the same name as somebody else who was in a gang in New York.
And it was the tattoo and the Chicago Bulls hat.
That wasn't included in what I read. The Chicago Bulls hat, yes, but I didn't see anything about his tattoo being gang related.
That's what he was. You're saying that didn't happen. I'm saying it did happen. That's where he was adjudicating that in front of the 2019 judges. Anyways, where are they providing that evidence? To who are they providing that evidence?
The judge.
No. Right. So they said this individual wore a red Chicago Bull hat, has this tattoo. Right. We're deporting him.
Right.
Who are they providing that information to?
The judge.
So there was due process.
No, he was adjudicated to not be in a gang.
No. So again,
so there was due process in a different case. That's a different case. That's not this case.
No. So when you're saying the DOJ has a checklist of things that they show,
that's not due process. The due process exists in a court.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with DOJ. That's the problem. Is that they're confusing the powers.
But I would say, personally, I don't think that an individual that the DOJ presents to show evidence that he is part of a foreign terrorist organization group should relatively have any due process, especially when they're in the country illegally.
But the entire point is that you don't know if he's part of a foreign terrorist group until you go before a judge.
But that's the thing, point. Is that if the DOJ was just like, like if there was no evidence whatsoever showing and they were just throwing individuals out of the country, that's one thing, right?
DOJ gets to make their case. DOJ gets to collect evidence.
But that's the thing is that, okay, in the time of war, will we go in front of a judge to provide evidence that it's somebody's part of a foreign,
That's up to the judge to decide. If the judge thinks that there's such an imminent threat of harm that it's an absolute emergency, then they'll say so. They did not in this case. They said every single person needs to get due process.
I just don't, personally myself, don't see the reason why if the DOJ presents evidence, and it doesn't have to be to a judge, it presents it to an official agency, whatever it is. That's what they've done. They outlined that this individual is this not only in the country. Listen, to me, it's easier because he's in the country illegally. I don't need to have any evidence that he's part of MS-13 or Tren de Aragua for him not to be in this country. He's already in the country illegally.
You don't feel for him in his situation?
No, not at all.
Why?
Again, well, let's look at the reason, right? In 2012, he came into the country illegally based on asylum case, right?
Right.
Didn't apply for asylum.
He doesn't speak English.
I don't care. Well, there's Spanish immigration lawyers.
Do you know what they tell people? Do you know what they tell people in Latin America? They say if you run into somebody who is in a uniform, they will put you in jail. They hear a whole bunch of horror stories. They hear horror stories about what happens to you, so that's why they're trying to evade it. They don't speak the language. They can't explain themselves.
That's good. I don't want people to come into this country feeling comfortable doing so illegally.
I don't know why a person who lives on this side of an imaginary line deserves to exist less than a person on this side of an imaginary line.
They all have the right to exist,
right? They have the right to exist.
They can exist in their country, and if they want to come to our country, they can do so legally.
Then don't call yourself compassionate, because it's.
I'm compassionate. I'm compassionate against cartels abusing illegal immigration, the massive amount of atrocity.
And I am too. I told you, throw them away forever.
I know you are. I'm compassionate for legal.
And I know you're compassionate. I'm sorry.
I know.
I'm just like.
No. I'm compassionate for legal immigration.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean that.
No, I'm not offended whatsoever.
Okay,
don't worry.
Thank you.
But what I'm saying is that I don't feel compassion, and that's why I say it's reasonable for you to say that for an individual that is here illegally. I may feel some sort of compassion if it's a legitimate asylum case, but based off the data that we have and based off this evidence that we have of him not seeking asylum for 7 years, that's enough reason for me to say, obviously, he's just BSing it, right?
What if the judge said that there was enough evidence to grant him asylum and then gave him a work permit and he checked in with ICE periodically every single time he was supposed to, because that's what happened in this case?
Yeah, but that happened with the immigration lawyer. That didn't happen with the actual district judge.
It happened with the district judge.
No, it didn't. So the judge, again, and I think this is where we're going to continuously keep running into this, and we can just look this up afterwards. But from what I've read is that he went in front of a judge in 2019 to try and seek asylum. The judge told him, we're not granting you asylum, and put a deportation order on him because of the evidence that was provided by whatever, I think it was Trump's DOJ at the time in 2019, that he was part of MS-13. The evidence they provided was the Chicago bull hat, the tattoos, and the name of the New York guy, right? He appealed that later, that ruling, and the appellate court agreed with the lower court.
That's not happening.
But then a completely different judge, an immigration judge, came in and put a withholding order on him, and it gave him all the stuff that you're talking about. It's a rough situation.
The higher court decided, which is the only relevant court, right? First of all, the way that it happened was he was hanging out in a Home Depot parking lot waiting for some work. He was wanting work.
Scooped up.
Right? And he got scooped up. So then the deportation order comes. In order to effectuate the deportation order, they have to go before a judge. And the judge did not effectuate the deportation order. Right? That's by the time it got to the higher court, or else he would have been gone by then. The withholding order.
That's the
withholding
problem.
order forbid him. See, I think one of the reasons again that I don't trust the Trump administration is because they're trying to consolidate power under the executive branch, and they're confusing everyone about what powers there are and whether there should be checks and balances. The entire point is that you don't get deported from this country until a judge says so, period. That it's never been any other way. And so what they're saying is, well, why?
Well, it's definitely been like that without.
It's never been like that. You get to go in front of a judge, period. You get to go in front of a judge.
Okay.
And I understand that they're saying Article 2 judge, Article 3 judge. it doesn't matter. The court decision that the Supreme Court used to make the decision that they did was off of the judge who said that you are forbidden. He's forbidden to be deported.
Let me ask you, in the case that you don't disagree that the Department of State is the one that can revoke individuals' temporary status in the United States, right?
I do disagree with that.
I mean,
the Attorney General
case,
cannot
though.
do that.
That's the case, though.
Right.
Not the DOJ. The Secretary of State, the Department of State, has the right to revoke an individual's temporary status in the United States. That they don't go and
call
adjudicate.
It into question. That doesn't mean they immediately go away.
Okay, with Mahmoud Khalil, the guy in Colombia,
yes.
they revoked his temporary status in the United States.
Right.
They don't need to go in front of a judge
Yes, they do.
to argue why they're removing his temporary status.
Yes, they do.
The Department of State, who issues the visa in the first place,
Yes.
has to go in front of a judge and explain
Yes.
why they're revoking the visa.
Yes, because people have rights.
One second. Is that what you want to be, or is that actually what is happening?
That is what's the truth.
So when Biden revoked somebody's visa, his temporary status in the United States, and then there was no due process for that. There's due process for the deportation part of it, which is what Mahmoud Khalil faces.
That's the entire point.
Well, that's the thing, right? The Department of State has the right to revoke an individual's visa and temporary status.
You have a right to challenge it.
Not that. You have the right to go in front of a judge and adjudicate your deportation order.
That's the same thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that like if you have
What's the difference?
if the Department of State revoked an individual's temporary status in the United States,
Yes.
and then sends them to be adjudicated in front of a judge for their deportation order, what happens if the judge says the individual can stay here?
Then they get their visa back.
You're going to force the judge is going to force the executive branch to go against their own policy?
Yes.
Well,
because it's not against their own policy.
That's a constitutional crisis. You're now infringing on the executive branch authority.
The only reason you're making that argument, respectfully, is because they have been telling you that the executive, you can't stomp on the executive's authority. That has been the mantra that they've been pushing.
You can. There's always checks and balances.
Exactly.
I agree with that, but there are circumstances in which the president has declared an emergency.
Yes.
Right. That allows them to enact the alien enemies statute.
Right.
That allows you to completely bypass the deportation part of having to be in front of a judge.
Yes, and in this case, the conservative Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade decided that every single person that they want to deport under the Alien Enemies Act gets due process.
So the court right now basically said, hey, I know that the precedent was like this during wartime, that we were able to deport individuals without due process. You're telling me that the conservative Supreme Court essentially, I guess, created another landmark decision when it comes down to this?
It's not a landmark decision. It still fits within the precedent because...
Well, they used to deport individuals without the quote-unquote due process part of it.
They still have a right to challenge that and say...
What right does a foreign national who's here illegally and invading, let's look at this from a wartime perspective, have in the United States?
Right. So
what jurisdiction does the United States have over them?
So let me be clear. If you are physically present in the United States of America, within the jurisdictional bounds, if you are physically here, you have due process rights, you have free speech rights, period.
Even
if you're here illegally, doesn't matter.
Even when the president declares an emergency and has wartime powers or emergency powers.
So this is a good question, because what I can clarify here is that those rights exist and are ignored, and that's okay, right? So this is good, because now we're getting down to the fundamentals, because that's the difference, right? So it's like
we arrived there.
And I'm sorry, I did not mean to call you not compassionate.
No, stop. I'm telling you, it's not a problem whatsoever.
I appreciate that. So
we won't have time to go over our
cringy
videos, but it's worth it for this conversation.
I feel like it is
and
too.
we will start the next episode with the cringe videos of our side.
I like that. So what you're pointing out correctly then, because even though you're not a lawyer, you logic this out better than most lawyers would.
Yes. You don't have to go to university, guys. No, I'm kidding.
It's the worst. But the rights still exist of the illegal immigrant, of the student with a student visa, whatever it is. The point is, do I get to bypass those or do I have to pay attention to them? Because they still exist even if you get to bypass them. The point is that if the president decides to bypass them, that this person can still come in and advocate for their rights because they had a right no matter whether you decided that it was there or it wasn't. And that's when you go before a judge and the judge says, were you allowed to bypass that or not? And in this case, they said you were not allowed to bypass that.
But isn't that the point of the habeas corpus? Do I say it right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Isn't the whole idea about that is that you can adjudicate whatever happened to you, but it's already when you're out of the country.
No, that's not what they meant at all.
Okay.
So there were two decisions, right? The Alien Enemies Act one, and the decision there was that you have to bring a petition in habeas, meaning it's just a different section of the law. So it had nothing to do. They just said you have to restart the case in Texas. They didn't say that that Trump was right to not provide them with due process at all. In fact, they said the exact opposite, which is why when the administration said that they won the case, I'm losing my mind. Then there's the second one, which is the order.
They technically did.
They technically did not.
But okay, hold up. But the whole argument maybe the argument
I have
has
pictures
shifted.
on my computer. I can get them, but I screenshotted it.
But maybe the argument, the goalpost has just shifted a little bit. Originally, Democrats were telling President Trump and just in general the executive that he has no authority to enact the Aliens Enemies Act and to deport individuals based on this Enemies Act because they're arguing there's no real no invasion, none of that stuff. In this case, they definitely won. Because you said it.
What is the purpose of the Alien Enemies Act?
To deport individuals
without due process.
Okay, well, so this is the problem then. At the end of the day, that he is able to have he's able to use the Aliens Enemies Act to deport individuals out of the United States. It's just that this Supreme Court has ruled that you have to provide them due process. In this case,
that doesn't make sense, right? Those two things can't coexist.
And that's the problem. That's why I'm confused what's happening.
And that's fair. So what he's saying, and it's clear to me that the Supreme Court threw him a bone doing this, right? Because if you say you can declare it, but you can't actually put it into effect because the entire point is to send people out without due process, then it looks to me like they just threw him a bone and so that they would be able to come out and say this. But the deal is that they said that when a president declares that the Alien Enemies Act is appropriate, that is usually not subject to judicial review.
Yeah.
They said we are not dealing with that question.
Yeah.
Right. And so they were like, you can declare bankruptcy, right? But we're not letting you bypass all these due process rights.
Yeah.
And so then in the order,
it's really interesting because the whole point of the Alien Enemies Act is to deport individuals without due process.
And nobody's framing it that way.
And it's not without due process because I'm against that idea. I'm against the idea of the government being, hey, you're this, we're going to get you out of
right.
But they need expedited deportation out of the United States, especially if they are fallen under the umbrella of imminent threat to the United States.
Certainly. And you could really categorize it by people who have criminal records and who don't. They have been falsely characterized as all of them having criminal records. But I watched a thing from the Times this morning where they got the FOIA for all of the people's criminal records. And one of them, it was a speeding ticket or it was trespassing, which they do on purpose because if you cross the border now it's a state crime, right? Into somebody's property. And then some of them didn't have criminal records at all. So they've just been lying.
Besides being here illegally.
Right. They've just been lying. But regardless, then somebody else has to justify that. So if you're Trump supporter A and you say that I only want to deport the criminals, right? And Trump's only deporting the criminals. And then somebody comes to you and says, and you're in your mind, you're thinking it's violent criminals, right? Because that's the picture he's painted. Yeah. And then somebody comes to you and says, well, these 6 young men that they just deported don't have any criminal record. Then you'd be like, well, I mean, they came here illegally, right? You end up slowly justifying things that you don't believe in because of the pictures that they've painted for you.
I think that's different because the majority of individuals that voted for Trump, hi Teddy.
Hi Teddy.
The majority of individuals that voted for Trump are exactly that. They hold that opinion that if you came into the country illegally, you should be subject to deportation.
I think that's right. I think that's right, because I told you about the comments that were on that video. There were like 300 of them that were just get out.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter whether the person had a record or not. It didn't matter whether the person had a legitimate asylum claim or not. And I don't think people understand. So like when I was in 11th grade, I took AP Spanish, right? And my teacher took us to go to we saw this prison, which really wasn't a prison. It was like dudes that were on a truck, like a trailer, and it had bars on it. These are just people. These are just people who are there, who crossed the border, right? And this was when Obama was president. They were just human beings.
Chief deporter.
Right? Like, I don't care if you voted for Trump. I don't care if you didn't. I don't care if you like Obama. I don't care if you don't. I don't want people to be treated like that if they don't deserve to be. It's just not fair. And the way that they've been characterized as all criminals in people's minds, all of a sudden, because he's been repeating over and over again, they're rapists, they're vermin, they're murderers. That's all you hear. He understands that now when it comes to, hey, maybe we're not going to grant these people due process, people are like, good, throw them away. Like, it's linguistically very manipulative. Mm-hmm. So the order, right, which was the turn the planes around, which it's so disingenuous for them to be like, oops.
I mean, it was a military operation, so for a judge to, but that's a whole different argument.
They admitted that
the third plane.
The United States government admitted that he was here legally and that he was deported illegally. They admitted that.
Well, sounds like a win-win to me. He came illegally and he got deported illegally.
I
think just to wrap it up, because I think you and I can keep going on and on about this. Is that immigration is one of those subjects for both of us that we're pretty hard on our position.
But you did convince me about benefits about remaining in Mexico.
Oh, well, there you go.
And I've changed my perspective on that, because
I do think slowly doing it.
I do think that vetting is really important.
And I agree with you on the overall position of I wouldn't want the government to have the power to just arbitrarily decide who's can be in the country and who couldn't be in the country. I think that you should go through the due process.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, when it's something like related to what the government claims to be an individual as part of a foreign terrorist organization, gang, whatever it is, that process should be a little bit more expedited.
Sure.
Because what we've seen is that individuals will take advantage of our awesome judicial system that we have here, and then we'll end up back on the streets, especially if it's in one of these George Soros-run DA cities. I know you hate that, but that's the reality of it. And then we have things like Lake and Riley. And I'm not by any means saying that this is systemically happening, but it's just a real example of how something like that can happen. Yeah. So there's a problem with no due process, and then there's a problem with like due process to like a person like an American who's here legally.
Don't like, stay here. Like, if there's a question about whether or not you might be a criminal, get out. Okay. Like, I totally agree with that. And I think that the Democratic Party might throw me out for saying that.
I was just about to say, I feel like such a limited amount of Democrats would agree with what you said.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with that. Any last things before we wrap up our first episode?
I would like to say thank you. And that I genuinely appreciate the opportunity to talk about stuff like this, because I learned, like the last time we did this, I learned that I believed in a lot of principles of Remain in Mexico. Like I learned that, I learned a better way to explain DEI. There's a lot to learn from talking with people, to where you don't have to like just call them names and walk away,
even when things get heated like this,
right? And I'm sorry.
No more sorries.
But I want people to know also that Democrats, even though I'm not one of them anymore, but people on the left can still be patriots. Like when I went to go write that stuff, like write the speeches for the state Senate, I read the Federalist Papers, not all of them, but I read the Federalist Papers, and I fell in love. Like, I fell in love with them. And I was like, why do Republicans get the Federalist Society? I was like, I love these papers. And I believed wholeheartedly, and I quoted James Madison constantly. Like, I loved it. And I don't know why all of a sudden, like, you have to be red in order to like hot dogs on the 4th of July. Like, take it back. It belongs to all of us. So thank you.
I'll show you
that.
some.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah,
And I
thank
think
you.
I'll show you a video of why that is happening
Yes.
next time.
Okay.
But I agree with you. I don't like this narrative that, Democrats can be patriotic and stuff like this. Largely, it is their fault for, take
It
this
is.
how way you ever want to. But,
You're right.
when I see them saying, oh, screw the American flag or screw the national anthem, right? It's not so patriotic,
It's
right?
not.
The other side doesn't really have that issue. But we have our issues. So, and that is the reason why I wanted to sit down in the first place, is because I think the best way how I can discuss the issues on my side
Yeah.
while also, criticizing your side is by sitting down with a
Yes.
person like yourself.
Thank you.
And I really do appreciate it. And I have to say that you have the most perfect balance of, I think Democrats overly use their heart instead of their brain. And you have the perfect balance
Thank
that
you.
humans need, right? You're
Thank
compassionate for people. Your policies reflect that. But you're not going to have biological men competing against women's sports because that
Because
is
they're not men.
it's not men and it's not common sense. And regardless how compassionate you want to be to the person that is saying that they're a woman, you're not going to do so.
It doesn't
And that
make
is what I
sense.
like. That is what I like. Too many Democrats on the other side do the complete opposite. They're so overly compassionate that they're willing to put aside common sense. They're forfeiting common sense.
Yeah.
I endorse that. I'm here like throwing a lifeline to you guys,
Yes.
but I endorse it. I hope that you keep doing it because
Thank
I want to
you.
win 2026. Thank you so much. Thank you guys.
Thank you, guys.